The transport ship Harmony's Dawn shuddered as it dropped out of hyperspace, the artificial gravity compensators struggling to keep pace with the sudden deceleration. In the cargo bay, 12-year-old Marcus Chin pressed his face against the small porthole, watching as the massive orbital station of Kepler 442 came into view. The structure spanned nearly 50 kilometers, its crystalline surfaces catching the light of the binary star system and throwing rainbows across the void. "First time seeing a draconian station?" asked Captain Williams, her weathered hands steady on the controls despite the ship's groaning protests. Marcus nodded, unable to tear his eyes away from the breathtaking sight. The station looked more like a work of art than a space habitat, with flowing organic curves that seemed to pulse with inner light. Smaller ships moved around it like silver fish around a coral reef, their movements graceful and purposeful. "Wait until you see the dragons themselves," Captain Williams continued, her voice carrying a note of wonder that surprised Marcus. Most adults he knew spoke of aliens with either fear or clinical detachment. The Draconians are, well, they're nothing like what the newsfeeds show back on Earth. Marcus's father had told him something similar before the accident. Dr. James Chen had been one of the lead xenobiologists assigned to the first peaceful contact mission with the Draconian Empire. He'd spent months preparing Marcus for this journey, filling his son's head with stories about beings of incredible intelligence and beauty, creatures who had mastered technologies that seemed like magic to human eyes. The boy's hand instinctively went to the small toolkit hanging from his belt, a collection of precision instruments that had belonged to his father. The metal was warm against his fingers, worn smooth by years of careful use. Inside were tiny screwdrivers, micro-welders, and delicate pliers, tools designed for the intricate work of repairing the complex devices that kept starships running. His father had taught him to use each one, showing him how patience and gentle pressure could fix almost anything. "Broken things aren't really broken," his father had said during one of their last evenings together. "They're just waiting for someone who understands them to help them work again." Sometimes the most beautiful things in the universe are the ones that have been carefully mended. The docking process took nearly an hour, with the station's AI systems guiding the Harmony's Dawn through a series of increasingly complex maneuvers. Marcus watched in fascination as geometric patterns of light played across the hull, the station apparently scanning every molecule of their ship. When the patterns shifted to a warm golden color, Captain Williams visibly relaxed. "They've accepted us," she explained. "The Draconians don't let just anyone dock with their stations. Your father's reputation opened doors that have been closed to humans for decades." As they moved through the airlock, Marcus felt his breath catch. The interior of the station was nothing like the sterile corridors of human space habitats. The walls seemed to be made of some kind of living crystal that pulsed with soft bioluminescent light. The corridors curved and flowed like natural caverns, but every surface was perfectly smooth and warm to the touch. Their guide was waiting for them in what appeared to be a reception chamber. Ambassador Thyssera was the first Draconian Marcus had ever seen in person, and the experience left him speechless. She stood nearly 3 meters tall, her scales shifting through shades of deep purple and silver as the light caught them. Her wings were folded gracefully against her back, and, when she smiled, Marcus could see that her teeth were like polished pearls. "Welcome, young Chen," she said, her voice carrying harmonics that seemed to resonate in Marcus's chest. "Your father spoke of you often during his visits. He was very proud of your gifts." Marcus felt a familiar tightness in his throat at the mention of his father. The accident had happened so suddenly, a catastrophic failure in the research station's life support systems. By the time rescue ships arrived, Dr. Chen and 17 other scientists were gone. The official reports called it equipment malfunction, but Marcus had spent enough time around his father's work to know that such failures were almost impossible in modern facilities. "Thank you for letting me come," Marcus managed to say. "My father always wanted to bring me here." Ambassador Thyssera's expression softened, and Marcus realized with surprise that the alien's emotions were clearly readable on her reptilian features. Grief, he recognized. And something that looked very much like guilt. "There is much we need to discuss," she said. "But, first, I believe there is someone you should meet." They traveled deeper into the station using what the ambassador called a flow lift, a transportation system that seemed to work by manipulating localized gravity fields. Marcus found himself floating gently through tubes of crystal that offered stunning views of the station's interior gardens and residential areas. Everywhere he looked, he saw Draconians of all ages going about their daily lives. Children played in zero-gravity playgrounds while their parents tended to impossible hanging gardens that grew in spiral patterns around pillars of light. Your species fascinates us, Ambassador THYSSRS said as they traveled. Most races we encounter develop either technology or empathy, but rarely both to such a degree. Humans seem to possess an unusual ability to find creative solutions to problems that have stymied civilizations far older than yours. My father said something like that once, Marcus replied. He told me that humans are good at fixing things because we understand what it's like to be broken ourselves. The ambassador's scale shifted to a warmer shade of gold. Your father was a wise being. His work here, it meant more to us than you know. They arrived at a section of the station that felt different from the rest. The walls here were softer, more organic, and the lighting had a quality that reminded Marcus of sunset on Earth. Through an archway, he could see what appeared to be a nursery or school, with young Draconians engaged in various activities under the watchful eyes of their elders. In one corner of the space, apart from the others, a small figure sat hunched over something clutched tightly to its chest. Even from a distance, Marcus could see that the young dragon was crying, not the violent sobbing of human children, but a quiet, musical keening that seemed to harmonize with itself. That is ZH Keth, Ambassador THYSSRS said softly. She is experiencing difficulties. Marcus looked more closely at the young Draconian. She was perhaps half the size of the adult, her scales a muted bronze color that seemed to flicker with patches of darker brown. Her wings were still small and translucent, clearly not yet capable of flight. Most concerning of all, she seemed to be favoring one arm, holding it close to her body in a way that suggested pain. What's wrong with her? Marcus asked. Many things, the ambassador replied, her voice heavy with sadness. ZH Keth was damaged in the same incident that claimed your father's life. The explosion at the research station injured several of our young ones who were visiting as part of a cultural exchange program. Her arm was badly hurt, and she has not spoken since the accident. Marcus felt his heart clench. He'd known that his father's death was part of a larger tragedy, but he hadn't realized that alien children had been involved. Can't your doctors help her? Our healers have done what they can for her physical injuries, Ambassador THYSSRS said. But trauma of the mind and spirit requires different medicine. ZH Keth blames herself for what happened. She believes that her curiosity, her desire to explore the human research areas, somehow caused the explosion. As they watched, ZH Keth shifted position, and Marcus caught a glimpse of what she was holding. It appeared to be a toy of some kind, but one that was clearly damaged. Parts of it hung at odd angles, and Marcus could see that several components had been torn away entirely. What is that? He asked. A kinetic sculpture, the ambassador explained. Your father made it for her during one of his visits. It was a bridge between our species. Part human engineering, part draconian artistry. When the explosion happened, ZH Keth was holding it. The blast damaged both her and the sculpture. Marcus studied the young dragon more carefully. There was something about her posture, the way she held the broken toy, that reminded him powerfully of himself in the weeks following his father's death. The protective clutching, the isolation, the sense that somehow this terrible thing was her fault. She thinks she broke it, he said suddenly, understanding flooding through him. She thinks she broke the toy, and that means she's somehow responsible for everything else that broke too. Ambassador THYSSR's scale shifted to a deep blue of surprise. How could you possibly know that? Because I felt the same way, Marcus admitted. When my father died, I kept thinking that if I'd been a better son, if I'd helped him more with his work, if I'd convinced him to stay home just one more day, maybe none of it would have happened. The ambassador was quiet for a long moment, watching as ZH Keth continued her lonely vigil. And how did you move past such feelings? Marcus touched his father's toolkit again, remembering the countless hours they'd spent together in his workshop. My father taught me that when something breaks, you don't throw it away. You figure out how it's supposed to work, you find the broken parts, and you fix them carefully, with patience and love. He said that broken things, when they're properly mended, are often stronger than they were before. And you believe this applies to beings as well as objects? I think so, Marcus said. My father always said that kindness was just another kind of tool, like his screwdrivers and welders. You use it carefully, in just the right place, and it can fix things that seem impossible to repair. Ambassador THYSSRA turned to look at Marcus directly, her large golden eyes studying his face with an intensity that should have been uncomfortable but somehow wasn't. Your father spoke truth when he said you had gifts, young Chen. Would you be willing to try to help ZH Keth? Our healers and counselors have had little success, but perhaps a different approach might be more effective. Marcus felt a flutter of nervousness in his stomach. He was just a 12-year-old human boy, and ZHKath was an alien being whose emotional processes he could barely understand. But, as he watched the young dragon's careful, protective movements around her broken toy, he felt something his father had taught him to recognize, the call of something that needed fixing. "I can try," he said simply. Ambassador HFY Scifi's scale shifted to a warm, hopeful gold. "Your father would be proud." They approached slowly, making no sudden movements that might startle the grieving young Draconian. As they drew closer, Marcus could see more details of both ZHKath and her damaged toy. The sculpture was clearly a marvel of engineering, combining human mechanical precision with alien aesthetic sensibilities. It appeared to be designed to create complex geometric patterns through the interaction of spinning rings and floating elements, but many of the delicate components had been twisted or broken entirely. ZHKath herself showed signs of recent medical treatment. Her left arm was supported by what looked like a biomechanical brace, and there were patches of darker scales along her neck and shoulder that suggested recent healing. But it was her eyes that concerned Marcus most. They held the kind of empty sadness that he recognized from his own reflection in the weeks after his father's death. "ZHKath," Ambassador HFY Scifi said softly, her voice taking on musical qualities that Marcus had not heard before. "I would like you to meet someone. This is Marcus Chen, son of Dr. James Chen." The young dragon looked up slowly, her gaze moving from the ambassador to Marcus and, then, back again. When their eyes met, Marcus felt a strange sensation, as if something was quietly touching the edges of his mind. Not intrusive or threatening, just curious. "Hello, ZHKath," Marcus said, settling down to sit cross-legged on the soft floor a respectful distance away. "I heard about what happened to you. I'm sorry you got hurt." The young dragon's head tilted slightly, and Marcus realized that while she might not be speaking, she was definitely listening and understanding. Her grip on the broken sculpture tightened protectively. "That's a beautiful toy you have," Marcus continued, keeping his voice gentle and non-threatening. "Did someone make it just for you?" ZHKath's eyes flickered toward Ambassador HFY Scifi, who nodded encouragingly. "Your father made it for her," the ambassador said. It was his way of showing how human and draconian technologies could work together in harmony. Marcus felt his throat tighten again at the mention of his father, but he pushed through the emotion. This wasn't about his grief, it was about helping someone else process theirs. "My father was really good at making beautiful things," he said to ZHKath. "He always told me that the most important part wasn't the final result, but the care and love you put into creating it." ZHKath's musical keening had stopped, though she still held the sculpture protectively. Marcus could see that she was listening, perhaps even understanding more than the adults around her realized. "I know it's broken," Marcus said, his voice barely above a whisper. "And I know it probably feels like it's your fault somehow. When my father died, I felt like I had broken everything good in the world just by not being able to save him." For the first time since they'd arrived, ZHKath's attention focused completely on Marcus. Her golden eyes seemed to see straight through to his heart, and he felt that strange mental touch again, stronger this time. Not invasive, but questioning, seeking to understand how this alien boy could possibly know what she was feeling. "But my father taught me something important about broken things," Marcus continued, slowly reaching for his toolkit. "He taught me that just because something is damaged doesn't mean it's ruined forever. Sometimes the most beautiful creations are the ones that have been carefully fixed, because they carry the story of both the breaking and the healing." ZHKath watched with intense focus as Marcus opened his toolkit, revealing the collection of precision instruments his father had left him. The tools seemed to catch the bioluminescent light from the walls, each one gleaming with the patina of careful use and maintenance. "Would you like me to take a look at your sculpture?" Marcus asked gently. "I can't promise I can fix it perfectly, but my father taught me how to mend broken things with kindness. Sometimes that's enough to help them work again, even if they're different than they were before." The silence stretched for long moments, broken only by the distant sounds of other young draconians playing in the far sections of the nursery. Marcus waited patiently, remembering his father's lessons about giving people the time and space they needed to make their own decisions. Finally, slowly, ZHKath extended her uninjured arm, offering the broken sculpture to Marcus. Her movements were careful, reverent, as if she were handing over something infinitely precious. Which, Marcus realized, she was. This wasn't just a toy to her, it was the last physical connection she had to the world before everything went wrong. Marcus accepted the sculpture with equal care, cradling it gently in his hands as he examined the damage. The break patterns told a story of sudden, violent force, clearly the result of the explosion rather than simple mishandling. Several of the delicate floating elements had been knocked out of alignment, and the main kinetic ring had a hairline fracture running along one side. "This is beautiful work," Marcus said honestly, his fingers tracing the elegant curves and precise angles. "I can see both human and draconian design principles working together." "Your father was really talented, ZH. The young dragon made a soft sound, the first vocalization Marcus had heard from her. It wasn't quite words, but it carried emotional weight that he somehow understood. "You miss him too," Marcus said, looking up from the sculpture to meet her eyes again. "Your father, I mean. And you're scared that because you were there when everything broke, somehow you're the reason it all happened." ZH's eyes widened with surprise, and Marcus felt that mental touch again, stronger and more complex this time. Images flashed through his mind, not his own memories, but hers. A warm, safe space filled with the sound of adult voices discussing exciting ideas. His own father's voice among them, patient and kind as he explained human engineering concepts. The joy of receiving the kinetic sculpture, watching its patterns flow and dance in the light. Then, sudden brightness, terrible noise, and pain that seemed to tear through everything she had thought was safe and permanent. "Oh," Marcus breathed, understanding flooding through him. "You were there when it happened. You saw everything." Ambassador THYSS moved closer, her expression concerned. "Marcus, are you all right? You look." "She's sharing her memories," Marcus said, his voice filled with wonder and compassion. "ZH, I can feel what you felt. The fear, the confusion, the way everything safe suddenly became dangerous." The young dragon's keening started again, but softer this time, less desperate. Marcus realized that she had been carrying these traumatic memories alone, unable to share them with anyone who could truly understand what she had experienced. "It wasn't your fault," Marcus said firmly, setting the sculpture down carefully and reaching out his hand towards ZH. "You were just a child, curious and excited about learning new things. That's exactly what you were supposed to be. The explosion, the accident, that was caused by equipment failure, not by anything you did." ZH stared at his outstretched hand for a long moment, then slowly reached out with her uninjured arm. When their fingers touched, Marcus felt a rush of shared emotion, grief and fear, yes, but also hope and the tentative beginnings of trust. "My father used to tell me that broken things aren't ashamed of being broken," Marcus continued, his voice growing stronger with conviction. "They're just waiting for someone who understands them to help them work again. I think the same thing is true about people. We all get damaged sometimes, but that doesn't make us worthless. It just means we need time and care and patience to heal properly." ZH's scales began to shift color, moving from the muted bronze they had been toward a warmer, brighter shade of gold. Marcus could feel her emotional state changing through their contact, the crushing weight of guilt and self-blame beginning to lift just slightly. "Now," Marcus said, picking up the sculpture again with his free hand, "let's see what we can do about this beautiful creation your father made for you. Because I think it's time for both of you to start healing." The workshop that Ambassador THYSS led them to was unlike anything Marcus had ever seen. It occupied a spherical chamber deep within the station, with curved walls that seemed to be grown rather than built. Workstations floated at various levels throughout the space, connected by streams of soft light that served as both illumination and transportation. Tools hung in gravitational suspension fields, available at a thought's notice to whoever might need them. "This is where our artisans and engineers collaborate," the ambassador explained as they settled onto a platform that adjusted automatically to accommodate both Marcus's human proportions and ZH's smaller draconian frame. "Your father spent many hours here during his visits, learning our techniques and sharing his own knowledge." Marcus could easily imagine his father in this space, his eyes bright with curiosity as he explored the alien technologies. Dr. Chen had always been fascinated by the intersection of art and science, and this workshop represented the perfect fusion of both disciplines. ZH settled beside Marcus, her broken sculpture cradled carefully in her good arm. The journey through the station had tired her visibly, but Marcus could sense her determination to see this through. The young dragon had barely spoken since their initial meeting, but her presence beside him radiated a complex mixture of hope, fear, and desperate need. "Before we begin," Marcus said gently, opening his toolkit and laying out his father's instruments. "I want to understand exactly how this sculpture is supposed to work." Keth, when it was functioning properly, what did it do? The young dragon looked uncertain, glancing between Marcus and the ambassador. Ambassador Thyssera nodded encouragingly. "Show him, little one. Let him see the memory of its beauty." Keth closed her eyes and extended her uninjured hand toward the broken sculpture. Suddenly, the air around them shimmered, and Marcus found himself experiencing another shared memory. This time, instead of trauma and fear, he saw wonder and joy. In Keth's memory, the sculpture was whole and magnificent. The central ring spun slowly, generating a localized gravitational field that caused the smaller floating elements to dance in complex, ever-changing patterns. As the elements moved, they caught and refracted light from the station's bioluminescent walls, creating cascading rainbows that painted the surrounding space with living color. But, most beautiful of all was the sound it made, a harmonic resonance that seemed to touch something deep in the listener's soul, a perfect blend of mathematical precision and emotional warmth. "It's incredible," Marcus breathed as the memory faded. "I can see why you loved it so much. It's not just a toy, it's like a piece of living art." Keth's scales brightened slightly at his appreciation, and Marcus felt a flutter of pleasure through their empathic connection. It was the first positive emotion he had sensed from her since they'd met. Marcus carefully examined the damaged sculpture with both his eyes and his hands, using techniques his father had taught him for assessing complex mechanical failures. The kinetic ring was the heart of the device, generating the gravitational fields that controlled everything else. The fracture running along one side had disrupted the internal resonance chamber, while the displaced floating elements had lost their careful calibration. "The good news is that nothing is completely destroyed," Marcus announced after several minutes of careful examination. "The damage looks terrible, but it's mostly a matter of realignment and careful welding. The real challenge will be recalibrating the gravitational field generators without destroying the harmonic resonance patterns." Ambassador Thyssera's scales shifted to a tone of concern. That level of precision typically requires both human technical expertise and draconian intuitive understanding of gravitational harmonics. It is a skill that takes years to master. Marcus looked up from the sculpture, his expression serious but determined. "Then, I guess it's a good thing Keth is here to help me. My father always said that the best repairs happen when different kinds of knowledge work together." The young dragon's eyes widened with surprise, and Marcus felt a surge of startled hope through their connection. She had clearly expected him to either fail completely or to take over the repair process himself. The idea that she might actually contribute to fixing her beloved sculpture seemed to catch her completely off guard. "I mean it," Marcus said, turning to face her directly. "I can handle the mechanical repairs, that's just a matter of patience and steady hands. But, you understand how the gravitational harmonics are supposed to feel, right? You know the patterns better than anyone because you've listened to them so many times." Keth made a soft, musical sound that might have been agreement. Her injured arm shifted slightly, and Marcus realized she was trying to gesture toward the sculpture but couldn't quite manage it with her current limitations. "Here," he said, gently taking her good hand and placing it on one of the undamaged sections of the kinetic ring. "Can you feel the resonance patterns, even though they're disrupted? Like an echo of how they used to flow?" Keth closed her eyes in concentration, her scales shifting to deeper shades of blue and green. Through their empathic connection, Marcus began to sense something extraordinary. The young dragon wasn't just remembering how the sculpture had sounded and felt, she was experiencing the mathematical relationships that governed its operation. Her mind naturally understood the complex interplay between gravitational fields and harmonic frequencies in a way that was purely intuitive. "Amazing," Ambassador Thyssera murmured. "I had not realized that Keth had inherited such a strong natural affinity for gravitational harmonics. It is a rare gift, even among our people." Marcus smiled, feeling a familiar excitement that reminded him of working alongside his father on particularly challenging problems. "Then, we make a perfect team. I'll fix what's broken mechanically, and Keth will guide me through the harmonic recalibration. Together, we can make this sculpture even more beautiful than it was before." The actual repair work began slowly, with Marcus using his smallest screwdrivers to carefully remove the displaced floating elements from the sculpture's gravitational matrix. Each piece had to be cleaned, checked for damage, and prepared for eventual reinstallation. The work required absolute precision, even a microscopic misalignment could throw off the entire system's delicate balance. ZHKeth watched every movement with intense focus, occasionally making soft sounds that Marcus learned to interpret as guidance. When he was working too quickly, she would emit a low, cautious tone. When his movements were properly aligned with the sculpture's original design, her sounds became more melodic and encouraging. "You're reading the gravitational patterns even in the broken pieces," Marcus realized after the first hour of work. "You can sense how each element wants to move in the field, can't you?" ZHKeth nodded slightly, then surprised both Marcus and Ambassador THYSSERA by speaking her first words since the accident. The patterns sing," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Even broken, they remember their song." Marcus felt tears prick at his eyes, not from sadness but from the profound beauty of her insight. "That's exactly right. Broken things remember how they're supposed to work, they just need help finding their way back to their proper patterns." The most challenging part of the repair came when Marcus began working on the fractured kinetic ring itself. The crack had propagated through several layers of the device's exotic matter matrix, requiring him to use techniques his father had taught him for working with materials that existed partially outside normal spacetime. "I need to use a quantum welder for this," Marcus explained to ZHKeth as he selected a tool that looked like a cross between a pen and a small telescope. "It's going to feel strange when I activate it, like reality is bending around the repair site. Can you monitor the harmonic patterns and let me know if I'm disrupting anything important?" ZHKeth placed her good hand on an undamaged section of the ring and closed her eyes in concentration. Marcus activated the quantum welder, watching as the fracture began to heal at the molecular level. The process was incredibly delicate, too much energy and the exotic matter would destabilize completely, too little and the repair wouldn't hold under operational stress. Through their empathic connection, Marcus could sense ZHKeth's awareness of the gravitational fields around them, fluctuating and shifting as the ring's structure gradually restored itself. Her musical vocalizations provided a constant feedback loop, rising when the harmonics were properly aligned and falling when adjustments were needed. "Almost there," Marcus murmured, sweat beading on his forehead from the intense concentration required. "Just a few more molecules to align and..." The quantum welder completed its work with a soft chime, and, suddenly, the kinetic ring hummed with renewed life. The gravitational field generators came online automatically, creating a gentle pull that made Marcus's tools want to orbit the sculpture like tiny planets around a star. "It's working," ZHKeth breathed, her scales brightening to brilliant shades of gold and silver. "I can feel the patterns reforming, stronger than before." Marcus grinned, carefully beginning the process of reinstalling the floating elements. With the main ring repaired, each piece found its proper position much more easily, guided by the restored gravitational matrix and ZHKeth's intuitive understanding of the harmonic relationships. As they worked together, Marcus began to notice something remarkable happening. ZHKeth was becoming more animated, more engaged, as if the act of participating in the repair process was healing something inside her as well as the sculpture. Her movements became more confident, her vocalizations more complex and musical. Most importantly, the crushing weight of guilt and self-blame that had surrounded her was gradually lifting. "You know," Marcus said as he installed the final floating element, "I think this sculpture is actually going to be more beautiful than it was originally. The repairs we've made have created new harmonic resonances, patterns that weren't there before." ZHKeth looked up at him with wonder in her golden eyes. "How can broken things become more beautiful?" Marcus thought of his father's words, spoken during one of their last conversations together. "Because," he said gently, "when something is carefully mended with love and patience, it carries the story of both its original creation and its healing. Those experiences become part of its beauty, making it more complex and meaningful than it was before." "Like scars that tell stories of survival," Ambassador THYSSERA added softly. "Your father spoke of similar concepts during his visits. He believed that resilience was one of humanity's greatest gifts, the ability to not just survive damage, but to grow stronger and more beautiful because of it." Marcus made the final connections, his hands steady despite the emotional weight of the moment. When he activated the sculpture's main power matrix, the effect was immediately spectacular. The kinetic ring began to spin, generating gravitational fields that caused the floating elements to dance in patterns that were both familiar and completely new. But it was the sound that took everyone's breath away. The sculpture didn't just reproduce its original harmonics, it had developed new tonal qualities, deeper and more complex than before. The repairs had created micro-variations in the gravitational field that translated into musical overtones of extraordinary beauty. The result was a symphony that seemed to bridge the gap between human technical precision and draconian artistic sensibility. ZHKeth stared at the restored sculpture with tears streaming down her scaled cheeks, but these were tears of joy rather than grief. Through their empathic connection, Marcus could feel her emotional state transforming. The darkness that had consumed her since the accident was being replaced by wonder, hope, and a growing sense of her own worth and capability. "I helped fix it," she whispered, her voice filled with amazement. "I was part of making it beautiful again." "You were essential," Marcus said firmly. "I could never have restored the harmonic patterns without your guidance." This sculpture is proof that when different kinds of knowledge work together with patience and care, they can create something more wonderful than either could achieve alone. The young dragon carefully lifted the sculpture with her good arm, marveling at the way the light patterns danced across her scales. For the first time since Marcus had met her, she looked like a child again, curious, hopeful, and excited about the possibilities that lay ahead. "Your father would be proud of both of you," Ambassador THYSSERA said, her own scales shimmering with emotion. "This repair represents everything he hoped to achieve through the cultural exchange program, genuine cooperation between our species, based on mutual respect and shared purpose." Marcus felt a bittersweet ache in his chest at the mention of his father. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had been joined by something else, a sense of connection and purpose that he hadn't felt since the accident. By helping ZHKeth heal, he had discovered that his own healing could begin as well. "There's something else we need to discuss," Ambassador THYSSERA continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The truth about what happened to the research station, and why both of your fathers died." Marcus and ZHKeth both looked up sharply, the sculpture's beautiful harmonics suddenly seeming distant and unimportant compared to the gravity in the ambassador's voice. "The explosion was not an accident," she said quietly. "It was sabotage, carried out by individuals who opposed the cultural exchange program and wanted to prevent deeper cooperation between our species. Your father, Marcus, discovered evidence of the plot just hours before the device was triggered. He died trying to warn others and evacuate the station." The workshop fell silent except for the gentle music of the restored sculpture. Marcus felt as if the floor had dropped out from under him, while through their connection he could sense ZHKeth's confusion and renewed anguish. "My father," Marcus began, then had to stop and clear his throat. "My father died trying to save people?" "Yes," Ambassador THYSSERA confirmed. "And ZHKeth's father died helping him. They were working together to override the sabotage device when it detonated. The cultural exchange program was suspended immediately afterward, and the investigation was classified at the highest levels." Marcus looked at ZHKeth, seeing his own shock and pain reflected in her golden eyes. But, alongside the grief, he saw something else, a growing understanding that their fathers had died as heroes, not victims, and that their sacrifice had meaning beyond the tragedy itself. "That's why you brought us together," he realized. "Not just to help ZHKeth heal, but to continue what our fathers started." Ambassador THYSSERA's scale shifted to deep purple, the color of solemn commitment. "The cultural exchange program is about to resume, Marcus. Both of our governments have agreed that the best way to honor your father's memory is to refuse to let fear and hatred destroy the bridges they died trying to build." Marcus felt ZHKeth's hand slip into his, her small fingers warm and reassuring. The sculpture continued its eternal dance between them, its restored harmonics serving as a reminder that broken things could indeed be mended, and that sometimes they became more beautiful in the process. "What do you need us to do?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the emotional turmoil he was feeling. The ambassador smiled, and, for the first time since they'd met, Marcus could see hope shining in her ancient eyes. "Learn," she said simply. "Grow. Become the bridge between our peoples that your fathers envisioned. Show the universe that cooperation and understanding are stronger than fear and hatred." Marcus squeezed ZHKeth's hand gently, feeling her squeeze back with equal determination. They were just children, damaged by tragedy and loss, but they were also proof that healing was possible. If they could overcome their trauma and work together to create something beautiful, perhaps there was hope for their entire species to do the same. The sculpture spun between them, its harmonics growing stronger and more complex with each passing moment, as if it understood that it had become more than just a repaired toy. It was now a symbol of resilience, cooperation, and the power of kindness to mend even the most devastating breaks. "We'll do it," ZHKeth said quietly, her voice gaining strength with each word. We'll be the bridge our fathers wanted us to be. Marcus nodded, feeling his father's presence like a warm hand on his shoulder. Together, he agreed. Because broken things become strongest when they're mended with love. 3 months after their first meeting, Marcus and ZHKeth had settled into a routine that would have seemed impossible during those first grief-stricken days. The educational wing of the orbital station had been converted into a unique learning environment designed specifically for their unprecedented collaboration. Human technology merged seamlessly with draconian architecture, creating spaces where both species could work and learn in comfort. Marcus woke each morning in his quarters overlooking the station's central garden, a vast spherical space where crystalline trees grew in impossible spirals around floating pools of luminescent water. The artificial gravity field allowed plants from a dozen different worlds to coexist in the same space, their roots reaching toward any source of nutrients while their leaves turned to catch the light from the station's artificial suns. "Good morning, Marcus," came ZHKeth's voice through the communication system as he finished his breakfast of synthesized proteins and fresh fruit from the hydroponic gardens. "The Council of Elders has approved our request for access to the historical archives today. Are you ready to learn about the first contact between our species?" Marcus grinned, feeling the familiar excitement that came with each new discovery about draconian culture. Over the past months, ZHKeth had become not just his partner in learning but his closest friend. Her natural curiosity and intuitive understanding of complex systems perfectly complemented his methodical approach to problem-solving. "I'll be there in 10 minutes, he replied, gathering his personal tablet and his father's toolkit. The tools had become something of a good luck charm, a reminder that the most important repairs often happen slowly, with patience and care. The historical archives occupied a section of the station that existed partially outside normal spacetime, allowing for the storage of vast amounts of information in a relatively compact area. Marcus still didn't fully understand the technology involved, but he had learned to navigate the shifting corridors and probability-locked chambers with the confidence born of practice. ZHKeth was waiting for him in their usual study chamber, her scales bright with excitement and anticipation. The young dragon had grown noticeably over the past months, her wings now large enough for short gliding flights and her injured arm completely healed thanks to the station's advanced medical technology. More importantly, the emotional wounds that had seemed so devastating during their first meeting had gradually transformed into sources of strength and empathy. "Look at this," she said eagerly, gesturing toward a holographic display that showed what appeared to be a primitive spacecraft drifting through empty space. "This is the first human ship to enter draconian territory, nearly a century ago. The crew was lost, unconscious, their life support systems failing." Marcus studied the image with fascination. The ship was clearly an early model, built for exploration rather than comfort. Its hull was scarred by micrometeorite impacts and the harsh radiation of deep space travel. "What happened to them?" "That's where it gets interesting," ZHKeth continued, manipulating the display to show internal views of the ship. "The Draconians who found them could have easily taken the ship as a prize or simply ignored the dying aliens. But, instead, they brought the humans aboard their own vessel and spent weeks learning their physiology well enough to provide proper medical care." The holographic display shifted to show the interior of a Draconian ship from a century ago, its design more organic and flowing than the current station but recognizably similar in its integration of art and technology. Marcus could see human figures lying unconscious on beds that had been hastily adapted for alien anatomy, while Draconian healers worked tirelessly to understand and treat conditions they had never encountered before. "They saved them," Marcus said, feeling a familiar warmth in his chest. Even though they had never seen humans before, even though there was no guarantee the humans wouldn't be hostile when they woke up. "One of the humans was a child," ZHKeth added, her voice soft with emotion. "A boy named Thomas Chen, about your age at the time. The Draconian healer who cared for him was my great-grandmother, Thysera the Elder." Marcus's eyes widened with sudden understanding. "Chen, that was my great-great-grandfather. The family stories always said he was saved by angels during a deep space mission, but no one believed the part about them having wings." "The connection between our families goes back generations," ZHKeth confirmed. "Your great-great-grandfather recovered completely, and he spent almost a year living with my great-grandmother's clan, learning their ways and sharing human knowledge in return. When he finally returned to Earth, he carried with him the seeds of the cultural exchange program that our fathers would eventually join." The holographic display shifted again, showing scenes from that first cultural exchange. Marcus watched in fascination as his ancestor worked alongside Draconian engineers, their collaboration producing innovations that neither species could have achieved alone. The images were touching in their portrayal of genuine friendship developing between beings who had started as strangers from different worlds. "There's more," ZHKF said, her excitement growing. "The Council of Elders has decided that our work here, our partnership, represents the true fulfillment of that first contact. They want us to participate in the formal resumption of the cultural exchange program." Marcus felt his heart rate increase with both excitement and nervousness. "What kind of participation?" "We would be the first joint human draconian research team in almost 20 years, ZHKF explained. Our mission would be to identify and solve problems that require both human creativity and draconian intuitive understanding. Essentially, we would be proof that cooperation between our species can accomplish things that neither could achieve separately." Marcus thought of the sculpture they had repaired together, its beautiful new harmonics serving as a constant reminder that broken things could become stronger when mended with care. "What kind of problems?" ZHKF gestured toward another section of the archive display, showing images of various alien species scattered across the galaxy. "There are 12 different civilizations that have contacted either humans or draconians seeking help with challenges they can't solve on their own. None of them are particularly hostile, but they're all facing crises that threaten their survival." Marcus studied the images with growing interest. Some of the aliens were vaguely humanoid, others utterly exotic in their forms and apparent environmental requirements. Each seemed to represent a unique set of biological and technological adaptations to their homeworlds. "The crystalline collective of Vega 7 has been slowly losing the ability to maintain their quantum consciousness matrices," ZHKF continued. "The seafoam singers of Kepler 62e are experiencing a breakdown in their sonic communication networks that's causing their entire civilization to fragment. The void dancers have somehow become separated from their home dimension and need help finding their way back." "And our governments think we can help solve these problems?" Marcus asked, feeling both honored and overwhelmed by the scope of the challenge. "Not solve them necessarily," ZHKF replied, her scale shifting to thoughtful shades of blue and green. "But approach them in ways that single-species teams haven't been able to manage. Human problem-solving tends to be very methodical and creative, while draconian understanding operates more through empathic resonance and pattern recognition. Together, we might be able to see solutions that have been invisible to others." Marcus nodded slowly, understanding beginning to dawn. "Like repairing your sculpture. I could handle the mechanical aspects, but I needed your ability to sense the gravitational harmonics to get the calibration right." "Exactly," ZHKF confirmed. "And the Council believes that our personal experience with trauma and healing gives us special insight into helping others who are struggling with their own forms of damage." The implications of what she was saying began to sink in for Marcus. They weren't just being asked to participate in academic research or diplomatic ceremonies. They were being entrusted with real responsibility for helping other civilizations survive and thrive. "There's something else you should know," ZHKF continued, her tone becoming more serious. "The saboteurs who killed our fathers, they weren't working alone. There's a coalition of extremist groups from both human and draconian societies that oppose deeper cooperation between our species. They see our partnership as a threat to what they consider the purity of their respective cultures." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. "Are we in danger?" "Potentially," ZHKF admitted. "But Ambassador THYSSERA believes that the best defense against such hatred is to demonstrate convincingly that cooperation makes both species stronger, not weaker. Our success in helping other civilizations would prove that the extremists are wrong about the dangers of cultural exchange." Marcus thought of his father's teachings about fixing broken things with kindness and patience. It seemed that the principle applied to more than just mechanical devices. Entire civilizations could apparently benefit from the same gentle, persistent approach to healing. "I want to do it," he said firmly. "Our fathers died trying to build bridges between our peoples. Maybe we can finish what they started." ZHKF's scales brightened with pleasure and relief. "The first mission would take us to the crystalline collective. Their quantum consciousness matrices are fascinating. They maintain individual identity while sharing collective knowledge and emotion. But the system is breaking down, and they don't understand why. Do we have any theories about what might be causing the problem?" Marcus asked, his engineer's mind already beginning to work on the challenge. "Several," ZHKF replied, calling up detailed schematics in the holographic display. "The crystalline collective believes it's a natural decay process, like entropy wearing down their quantum coherence over time. But draconian empathic analysis suggests emotional trauma at the core of their shared consciousness, something that happened generations ago and has never properly healed. Marcus studied the schematics with growing fascination. The crystalline collective's technology was unlike anything he had ever seen, operating on principles that seemed to blur the line between consciousness and physics. An emotional wound that's been affecting their technology for generations. That's exactly the kind of problem that might need both human technical expertise and draconian empathic understanding. The mission would last approximately 6 months, ZH continued. We would travel aboard a joint human-draconian exploration ship with a crew specifically selected for their experience in cross-cultural cooperation. Our job would be to study the crystalline collective's problem from every possible angle and develop solutions that address both the technical and emotional aspects of their crisis. Marcus felt a familiar surge of excitement mixed with nervousness. 6 months in deep space, working alongside alien beings to solve a problem that had stumped their own scientists for decades. It was exactly the kind of challenge his father would have embraced with enthusiasm. When would we leave? He asked. In 3 weeks, ZH replied. That gives us time to complete our advanced training in xenobiology, quantum consciousness theory, and diplomatic protocol. We'll also need to practice working together under the kind of pressure we might encounter in a real crisis situation. Over the following days, Marcus threw himself into the preparation program with an intensity that surprised even him. The coursework was challenging, covering everything from the basic physics of quantum consciousness matrices to the complex etiquette required for successful interaction with crystalline lifeforms. But what excited him most was the way the training reinforced his partnership with ZH. Working together on simulation exercises, they discovered that their different perspectives created a synergistic effect that was greater than the sum of its parts. Marcus's methodical approach to problem analysis helped ZH organize her intuitive insights into actionable strategies, while her empathic abilities allowed him to understand the emotional components of technical problems he might otherwise have approached purely mechanically. You know, ZH said one evening as they worked through a particularly complex simulation involving a civilization whose technology was based on symbiotic relationships with sentient plants, I think our fathers would be amazed by what we've learned to do together. Marcus looked up from his calculations, seeing the warm golden glow in ZH scales that indicated contentment and affection. Over the past months, he had learned to read her emotional states as easily as she read his, their partnership developing into something that felt almost telepathic in its intuitive understanding. I think they'd be proud, he agreed. Not just of what we can accomplish, but of who we become. When I first met you, we were both so broken by grief and guilt. Now we're proof that broken things can become stronger when they're mended with care, ZH finished, echoing the words he had spoken to her during their first meeting. Your father's wisdom about kindness being a tool for repair, it applies to people just as much as it does to machines. Marcus nodded, thinking of the long journey that had brought them to this point. The trauma of losing their fathers would always be part of who they were, but it no longer defined them. Instead, it had become the foundation for their ability to help others heal from their own forms of damage. There's one more thing I want to show you before we leave, ZH said, leading him to a section of the archives he had never seen before. The final records from our father's last mission. The holographic display materialized around them, showing the interior of the research station in the hours before the explosion. Marcus felt his breath catch as he saw his father working alongside ZH parent, their collaboration smooth and efficient despite the growing urgency of their situation. They knew, Marcus realized, watching his father's methodical approach to evacuating the station's most vulnerable inhabitants. They knew they probably wouldn't survive, but they kept working anyway. Love, ZH said softly, her voice thick with emotion. Not just for their own children, but for the future they were trying to build. They believed that cooperation between our species was worth dying for. Marcus watched his father's final moments, seeing the calm determination in his actions as he worked to save as many lives as possible. There was no panic, no despair, just the quiet courage of someone who understood the importance of what he was fighting to protect. We won't let their sacrifice be meaningless, Marcus said, his voice steady despite the tears streaming down his face. We'll show the universe that their vision was worth everything they gave for it. ZH moved closer, her wing extending to shelter him in a gesture of comfort that had become natural between them. Together, she agreed. Because that's how the strongest repairs are made, with patience, kindness, and the understanding that broken things can become beautiful again. The archive display faded, leaving them standing in the soft glow of the station's bioluminescent walls. In 3 weeks, they would begin their first mission as partners in the renewed cultural exchange program. They would face challenges that neither of their species had been able to solve alone, armed with nothing but their combined knowledge, their hard-won wisdom about healing, and their unshakable belief that cooperation was stronger than division. Marcus thought of the sculpture that had brought them together, its restored harmonics serving as a constant reminder that the most beautiful things in the universe were often those that had been carefully mended. Soon, they would have the chance to apply those same principles on a much larger scale, helping entire civilizations heal from wounds they might not even fully understand. It was exactly the kind of challenge his father would have embraced, and Marcus found himself looking forward to it with excitement rather than fear. Broken things, after all, were just waiting for someone who understood them to help them work again. The exploration ship Unity's Promise emerged from hyperspace at the edge of the Vega 7 system like a needle threading through cosmic silk. Marcus pressed his face against the observation deck's transparent aluminum viewport, watching as the crystalline collective's home world resolved from a distant point of light into something that defied every expectation he had harbored during the 6-week journey. Vega 7 wasn't a planet in any conventional sense. Instead, it appeared to be a vast geometric structure, as if someone had taken the concept of a crystal lattice and expanded it to planetary proportions. Prismatic spires reached toward space while intricate networks of light pulsed through translucent chambers that stretched for thousands of kilometers. The entire structure rotated slowly around its central axis, generating the artificial gravity necessary for maintaining its complex internal environment. "It's beautiful," Zhketh whispered beside him, her scales shifting to shades of purple and silver that reflected the crystalline world's alien radiance. "But I can feel something wrong with it, even from this distance. There's a discord in the harmonic resonances." Marcus nodded, trusting her empathic abilities to detect problems that his human senses couldn't perceive. Over the past 6 months, their partnership had evolved to the point where they could almost read each other's thoughts, their different perspectives combining to create insights that neither could achieve alone. Captain Sarah Martinez approached from behind, her expression mixing professional concern with genuine fascination. The Unity's Promise was itself a testament to human draconian cooperation, its hybrid crew working together with an efficiency that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. "The Crystalline Collective has agreed to allow us to dock," she reported. "But they've warned us that the quantum consciousness matrix degradation has accelerated since their last communication. Some of their population centers have gone completely silent, their inhabitants apparently falling into catatonic states." "How long do we have?" Marcus asked, his engineer's mind already beginning to work on the problem. "Difficult to say," Captain Martinez replied. "At the current rate of decay, the collective estimates that their civilization will cease to function within 3 months. But the progression isn't linear, they could experience catastrophic failure at any point." Marcus and Zhketh exchanged glances, both understanding the enormous pressure that had just been placed on their young shoulders. They were here as representatives of the renewed cultural exchange program, but they were also possibly the last hope for an entire civilization. The docking process took several hours, as the collective's port authority carefully scanned the Unity's Promise to ensure compatibility with their crystalline environment. Marcus watched in fascination as geometric patterns of light flowed across their ship's hull, the alien technology apparently reading every molecule and energy signature to determine whether their presence might disrupt the delicate quantum systems that kept the world functioning. When they were finally granted permission to board, Marcus felt as if he was stepping into a living piece of jewelry. The corridors of the crystalline collective's habitat were carved from what appeared to be solid diamond, but which his tricorder readings indicated was actually a form of quantum-stabilized carbon that existed in multiple dimensional states simultaneously. Light flowed through the walls like blood through veins, carrying information and energy to every part of the vast structure. Their guide was a being called Resonance of Deep Understanding, whose crystalline body stood nearly 4 meters tall and seemed to be carved from living sapphire. When it spoke, its voice came not from any visible mouth but from harmonic vibrations that resonated through the walls themselves. "Welcome, young bridge builders," Resonance said, the words carrying overtones of meaning that Marcus felt more than heard. "Your arrival brings hope to those of us who still maintain coherent consciousness. But I must warn you, the silence spreads daily, claiming minds that have contributed to our collective harmony for millennia." As they moved deeper into the habitat, Marcus began to understand the scope of the crisis. Entire sections of the crystalline structure had gone dark, their internal light patterns dim and chaotic. In other areas, they could see individual crystalline beings standing motionless, their bodies still functioning but their consciousness apparently disconnected from the quantum matrix that bound their civilization together. It began approximately 50 years ago, Resonance explained as they entered what appeared to be a central chamber. At first, it seemed like natural quantum decay, individual consciousness nodes occasionally losing synchronization with the collective matrix. But the rate of disconnection has accelerated exponentially, and we've discovered that it's not random. Marcus studied the chamber around them with growing amazement. The space was vast, its crystalline walls extending upward beyond the reach of his vision. Streams of light flowed between geometric formations that floated in carefully maintained gravitational fields, creating patterns of incredible complexity and beauty. But even his untrained eye could see the areas where the patterns had become fragmented, where the smooth flow of information had been disrupted by gaps and discontinuities. "Can you show us the quantum consciousness matrix directly?" ZHKF asked, her empathic abilities apparently allowing her to sense the emotional weight behind Resonance's careful explanations. To experience the matrix directly would require temporary integration of your consciousness patterns, Resonance warned. The process is reversible, but it carries risks for beings whose minds were not evolved for quantum collective existence. Marcus felt ZHKF's hand slip into his, her touch providing both comfort and determination. "We need to understand the problem from the inside," she said firmly. "Our fathers died trying to build bridges between different species. The least we can do is risk a little temporary discomfort to continue their work." Resonance's crystalline form seemed to pulse with approval. "Your courage honors your heritage. The integration process will begin slowly, allowing your minds to adapt gradually to the collective state." What followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever experienced. As Resonance began the quantum integration procedure, he felt his individual consciousness expanding, reaching out to touch minds that were utterly alien yet somehow familiar. The crystalline collective didn't just share information, they shared experience itself, creating a form of existence where joy, sorrow, discovery, and wonder were communal rather than individual. But, as his awareness grew, Marcus began to sense the cancer that was eating away at the collective's heart. There was a wound in the quantum matrix, a place where trauma had been incompletely processed and had begun to spread like an infection through the shared consciousness network. The pain was ancient but still raw, a grief so profound that it threatened to tear apart the very foundations of their civilization. Beside him, ZHKF gasped as her empathic abilities brought her into direct contact with the source of the trauma. Through their connection, Marcus felt her experience the collective memory of what had happened 5 decades earlier, a contact with an alien species that had seemed promising at first but had ended in betrayal and mass murder. The crystalline collective had welcomed the visitors with open curiosity, sharing their technology and cultural knowledge freely. In return, the aliens had studied the quantum consciousness matrix carefully, apparently fascinated by the concept of shared existence. Only too late did the collective realize that their guests were actually predators, seeking to steal the matrix technology for their own purposes. The attack had been swift and brutal. The aliens had used their knowledge of the quantum systems to introduce a virus into the collective consciousness, one designed to harvest individual awareness patterns for later study. Thousands of crystalline beings had died before the infection could be contained, their consciousness patterns torn away from the matrix and stored in alien databases like specimens in a laboratory. They never processed the trauma properly, Marcus realized, his voice tight with emotion as the integration procedure brought him deeper into the collective memory. The grief and betrayal were so overwhelming that they isolated those experiences instead of integrating them, but the isolation created quantum instabilities that have been growing stronger over time. "It's like an infected wound," ZHKF added, her empathic abilities allowing her to feel the ongoing pain that the collective had been carrying for 5 decades. The hurt never healed because they couldn't face it directly, and now it's poisoning their entire civilization. Resonance's form flickered with acknowledgement and despair. "We have tried for decades to address the instabilities through technical solutions, quantum stabilizers, consciousness buffers, matrix realignment procedures. Nothing has worked because we cannot bear to approach the source of the damage directly." Marcus thought of his father's toolkit, the instruments designed for patient, careful repair work. "What if we could help you process the trauma safely? Not by trying to forget it or isolate it, but by integrating it into your collective memory in a way that honors those who were lost while allowing the healing to begin? Such a procedure would require us to experience the pain fully," Resonance said, its harmonic voice carrying notes of fear and hope in equal measure. "The risk would be enormous, we might lose what remains of our coherent consciousness. Or," ZHKF said gently, "you might discover that shared pain, like shared joy, becomes more bearable when it's fully accepted as part of your collective experience." My partner and I both know something about healing from trauma. Sometimes the only way through the darkness is to walk into it willingly, with people who understand what you're going through. Over the following weeks, Marcus and ZH worked with the Crystalline Collective to develop a therapeutic protocol unlike anything that had ever been attempted. Using principles adapted from both human psychotherapy and draconian empathic healing, they created a framework for allowing the collective to safely re-experience their traumatic memories while maintaining quantum coherence. The process was delicate and dangerous, requiring Marcus to design quantum stabilization equipment that could maintain matrix integrity during periods of intense emotional disruption, while ZH provided empathic support that helped the collective process feelings that had been suppressed for decades. Remember, Marcus said as they prepared for the first major integration session, the goal isn't to make the pain go away. It's to transform it from an infected wound into a scar that tells the story of survival and resilience. The session began with Marcus activating the quantum stabilizers, their gentle harmonic resonance providing a foundation of safety for the collective consciousness. Then, ZH extended her empathic abilities into the matrix, offering emotional support as the collective began to approach the memories they had been avoiding for half a century. What followed was unlike anything Marcus had ever witnessed. The entire crystalline habitat seemed to shudder with emotion as thousands of minds simultaneously experienced the betrayal and loss that had defined their recent history. Light patterns fluctuated wildly through the walls, sometimes coherent and sometimes chaotic, as the quantum matrix struggled to process feelings that had been locked away for so long. But, gradually, something beautiful began to emerge from the chaos. Instead of being overwhelmed by the trauma, the collective began to find ways to integrate it into their shared experience. The memories of loss became testimonies to the value of those who had been taken. The pain of betrayal became wisdom about the importance of careful trust and protective boundaries. "It's working," Resonance announced, its voice carrying harmonics of wonder and relief. "The quantum instabilities are stabilizing. The trauma is becoming part of our strength rather than our weakness." Marcus watched the light patterns in the walls gradually return to coherent beauty, their flow now incorporating new elements that spoke of resilience and hard-won wisdom. The matrix was becoming more complex, more nuanced, as it learned to hold both joy and sorrow as essential components of complete existence. But the real test came when they attempted to reconnect with the consciousness nodes that had been lost to the spreading silence. One by one, the darkened sections of the habitat began to glow with renewed light as isolated minds rediscovered their connection to the collective matrix. The reunion was profoundly moving, even for observers like Marcus and ZH who experienced it only secondhand. Consciousness patterns that had been separated for months or years flowed back together like streams rejoining a river, their individual experiences enriching the collective understanding in ways that no single mind could achieve alone. "Thank you," Resonance said as the final integration session concluded successfully. "You have given us something more precious than mere survival. You have shown us how to transform our wounds into sources of wisdom and strength." Marcus felt ZH hands squeeze his as they watched the restored habitat pulse with renewed life and purpose. The crystalline collective had not just healed from their trauma, they had become stronger and more resilient as a result of learning to process it properly. "This is what our fathers dreamed of," ZH said softly, her scales shimmering with deep satisfaction. Different species working together to solve problems that none could address alone, each contribution making the final solution more beautiful and effective. As the Unity's promise prepared for departure, Marcus reflected on how much had changed since the first day when he had met a crying dragon child holding a broken toy. They had learned that healing was not about returning to some imagined perfect state, but about integrating all experiences, even painful ones, into a stronger and more complete whole. The restoration of the crystalline collective's quantum consciousness matrix would be remembered as a landmark achievement in interspecies cooperation, proof that the cultural exchange program's vision of mutual assistance was not just idealistic hope but practical reality. But, for Marcus and ZH the real victory was smaller and more personal. They had honored their father's memory by continuing the work of building bridges between species. They had proven that trauma could be transformed into wisdom, that broken things could become stronger when mended with patience and care, and that kindness truly was one of the most powerful tools in the universe. As the ship jumped back into hyperspace, carrying them toward their next mission and the next opportunity to help heal a broken cosmos, Marcus touched his father's toolkit one final time. The instruments were still there, still ready for whatever repair work the universe might require. But now he understood that the most important tools he carried were not made of metal and crystal. The most important tools were the ones his father had taught him to use with his heart: patience, empathy, determination, and the unshakable belief that broken things were just waiting for someone who understood them to help them work again. With those tools, and with ZH as his partner, there was no wound too deep to heal, no damage too severe to repair. The universe was vast and, often cruel, full of species struggling with traumas they couldn't process and problems they couldn't solve alone. But it was also full of beings capable of incredible kindness, wisdom, and cooperation when they found the courage to reach across the barriers that separated them. Marcus and ZH had become living proof of his father's deepest teaching, that broken things, when carefully mended with love, often became more beautiful and stronger than they had ever been before. And, in a cosmos that sometimes seemed designed to shatter hearts and crush hope, that was perhaps the most important lesson of all.